All right, so I have no idea how one prepares for the next panel, given all the changes that we've seen. But I'm very excited to hear from the great debate. And this time the topic is heightened regulation chilling investment activity in private companies? So please put your hands together for our next panelists and our final panel.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's a bright light.
Good to see everyone. So this session is going to be interactive, so I want you to put your thinking caps on and be prepared to contribute. We actually have so this has become a tradition at the Berkeley Forum in the Great Debate that we have a trophy for the debate champion. But my opponent and I discussed, and given our relationship and the fact that you'll hear at the end our true views on this subject, and we desperately want this to be interactive, this trophy is going to go to the best audience contribution. So think about the debate topic, think about your views on the topic. After we present our sort of opening arguments and have a bit of a discussion, we will open it up to the audience to contribute their views. Today's great debate the question is heightened regulation chilling investment activity in private companies? I will be arguing in the negative. I am Adam Sterling, Assistant Dean at Berkeley Law. My challenger is Nadia Dougal. Nadia is the co-founder of Tome and General Counsel of Congruent Ventures. Nadia will be arguing in the affirmative.
You know what's funny, Adam? When I was thinking about what side I'd take in this debate, I was like, should I take the harder side, which is that it hasn't impacted investment? And I was like, that's clearly the harder side, right? So I took the easier side, because obviously it has impacted investment.
Fair enough. By way of background, Nadia told me earlier that she defeated the debate champion in high school. I have no debate experience.
Never said that.
I'm just a friendly public servant, so consider that when you vote on who won today's debate. We're going to do this as sort of a casual Oxford-style debate. So I'm going to poll the audience, and we're just going to get a sense, and Anjali, maybe you can help us sort of look at the audience. So I want you now to raise your hand if you believe that, yes, heightened regulation is chilling investment activity in private companies.
I need to see more hands.
Raise them high.
Yeah, like, don't be shy.
Okay, we're doing a rough count. 15. Wow. Okay, I've learned that you have to ask the opposite, because many of you just won't raise your hands no matter what we ask. So please raise your hand now if you believe that heightened regulation has not chilled investment activity in private companies.
What? Wow, interesting.
20 plus.
Jeez.
20 plus.
Okay,
20
maybe,
plus.
Maybe I chose the wrong side here.
Raise your hand if you're not sure why you're still here. No, okay. So I'm going to kick things off. I will make my argument, and then Nadia will respond, and then you'll give your arguments. I'll respond. We'll have a bit of a discussion, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. We've got some mic runners. So this is your chance. I think in addition to a trophy, maybe you'll be invited to join the great debate next year.
Maybe.
So is heightened regulation chilling investment activity in private companies? My role today is to argue that it is not. And I want to make 3 arguments. The first is that the data, which I'm going to cite, just doesn't support this. And if we look at the last 2 administrations in the US, the Biden administration and the Trump administration, if anything, the data says that investment activity has actually increased under the Biden administration. This morning, I opened up NVCA's PitchBook Venture Monitor, which is a great quarterly report on venture activity in the United States. And I added up the total deal value of all deals under the Trump administration and compared it to that under the Biden administration. And I think as part of this debate, I'm sort of putting the Biden administration as a stand-in for increased regulation. And under the Biden administration, and this does not include the rest of his term, Total deal value in venture was 880 billion, approximately, against 560 billion under the Trump administration. In the total number of deals, about 64,000 under the Biden administration, about 52,000 under the Trump administration. If we look at two of the verticals, which I think has sort of been at the forefront of the conversation around innovation, investment, and regulation, crypto actually saw its highest year, its peak of investment in the first quarter of 2022 at just over $11 billion of investments in crypto companies. Again, we're talking about investment activity in private companies, which I would argue is sort of separate from the price of Bitcoin, which has peaked after the election. Artificial intelligence. According to US News, artificial VC investments in AI startups exceeded 24 billion in the second quarter of 2024, more than double the previous quarter. Now, my opponent is probably going to argue that where we really need to look and where the problem around heightened regulation is around M&A and exit activity. And I think even the data there runs counter to that argument. According to Axios, US M&A volume by dollar was up 20% year over year through the end of the third quarter of this year. Private equity-backed deal value was up 45%. And even the average annual dollar value or volume of M&A deals was higher under the Biden administration than it was under Trump, even if you exclude 2020 and the COVID times. I took a look at the 5 largest M&A tech deals adjusted for inflation. Of those 5 deals, 2 are under the Obama administration, 2 are under the Biden administration, and only 1 occurred under the Trump administration. And there was arguably more M&A, more IPOs, 1,500 under the Biden administration versus around 1,100 under the Trump administration. My final point to open up is that I would argue even smart regulation is critical for increased investment activity in private companies. Yesterday, we heard about the story of Microsoft and Google, and imagine if Microsoft was allowed to sort of prevent any challengers, the sort of incumbent advantage, and we think about the competitive goals of antitrust regulation, arguably Google would not have made its investors very wealthy and been what it is today, and arguably Google is going to prevent other competitors and challengers from taking on their space. In the fintech space, big banks attempted early on to regulate or push regulation onto startups like PayPal. That didn't happen. We wouldn't be talking about Elon Musk and maybe wouldn't even be having this debate today. So I think if we take a close look at the data here, it just doesn't back up this argument. And if anything, more of the data runs counter to this argument that we've seen increased investment activity. And I would further argue that it fails to take into account things that impact investment activity far greater than regulation. Valuation corrections. If you have a startup that's far overvalued, that more than external factors like regulation are going to impact your ability to sell that company. Macroeconomic conditions, interest rates, things like COVID, and market saturation, right? With the exception of a few of the best AI companies, it's going to be difficult to sell many of those AI companies in the next 10 years. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nadia.
You said it was going to be one argument, and you basically gave 20. So I have to
One argument in 3 parts.
Oh, come on, potato, potato. All right, so you give a lot of this data, which, hey, it's data, I get it. And it talks about investment activity in a very broad brush. And I can tell you, or very broad strokes. And so I can tell you, being in the room for a seed stage venture fund, when we're deciding on whether to invest in a company or not, we're not looking at whether, our ability to exit this company in 10 years has been impacted by Alina Khan. It's just not a topic of conversation for us. But I would almost say that we're not the kind of investors impacted by that type of end state regulation. So at the seed stages, actually a lot of deal making is still happening at pretty frothy valuations depending on what sector you're talking about, including AI. because the people in the room just aren't thinking about that. But when you look at later stage investors, I'm talking about like Series E, Series F, growth stage investors, that's where the real compression is happening. And so, yeah, if you look at the data broadly and say, okay, investment activity has increased, and in terms of number of deals, I would argue like, okay, maybe like seed stage deals have increased, but what's happening at the later stages? The fact of the matter is that at the later stages, investors who are putting their money in want to be the first ones to get their money out. And they also want like a 2-3x multiple on their investment, roughly at that stage. And so, look, if they're going to put in $1 billion and they want $3 billion out, what's their exit pathway? The capital markets, which you cite as being very favorable to tech companies right now, just isn't the case. When we project out our exits on an IPO basis for all of our companies, the capital markets aren't fertile at all for billion-dollar tech exits. It's completely savage out there. And law firms, I think, are chomping at the bit for an opportunity to take a company public. So I just don't see the markets that busy for these types of companies. Maybe for other issuances, yeah, but not for these types of companies. And so if you're a later stage investor and the capital markets are frozen, and then if I want to sell Figma, which got vetoed in its acquisition by Adobe, right? Like, why would what's my incentive to do this deal when my avenues for getting liquidity for my investors are so slim? And so for me, I think the data doesn't really tell the whole picture. You kind of have to dive into it. The second point is you cite that like AI and crypto have been seeing increased investment activity. I think that's what you said. And because I don't know if it was increased investment activity or exit, whatever. I think it was investment activity. But my counter argument to that is maybe regulation hasn't caught up to these technologies yet. Technology in Silicon Valley operates on an ask for forgiveness, not for permission basis. And so I view like the Fed, not the Fed, FTC as operating as like on a level where they're just starting to understand what Amazon does. And they're just starting to regulate those businesses. And if you recall, Lina Khan's law journal essay about monopolies in tech was based on Amazon using negative gross margins to get market share. And that was in the mid-aughts, mid-teens, like that long ago. But Amazon by that point had already become a runaway success. So it's like, yeah, of course you're going to see increased investment activity in AI and crypto. These businesses aren't regulated. And so that actually proves my point. But if you look at other industries, like traditional tech industries, regulation has definitely impacted things. We don't quite understand why Adobe wasn't able to acquire Figma, like what the argument was. And we can't extract a cogent line of reasoning to apply to other cases so we can meaningfully discern what's a good multi-billion-dollar exit versus a bad one.
Thanks, Nadia. So you said that data doesn't tell the whole picture. I would argue that neither do anecdotes. That being said, I think you brought up some really interesting points. We're close friends, and we had an agreement to be a little feisty up here. I'm going to drop the mic and leave. Yeah, I think there's actually, I think you pointed to a lot of interesting things. And I think, you know, in taking the question as it was framed to us, I think that we can't certainly say that heightened regulation chills all investment activity. Arguably, it maybe chills some very specific, but we were asked a question more broadly. And I think it brings up a really important point, and I think it's something that the regulators are trying to address, that we have this problem in Silicon Valley where startups are innovating not to compete with the Googles or Amazons of the world, but they're simply innovating to be acquired by the Googles and the Amazons of the world. And I think that actually doesn't lead to sort of innovation we might want to see as a society. And when I practiced in this space over a decade ago, right, there was this sort of feedback loop of founders starting companies sort of while they're at Google, building the companies, then being acquired at Google, doing their time at Google, and kind of again and again. And I think that's just not true innovation.
But you have this very prescriptive view of how regulation promotes the type of innovation that we want. But I would argue that natural forces have already helped us significantly because, look, Google has dominated search for so many years. and then now it's completely unusable because the first 20 results are basically paid for, and here's OpenAI. And this was a measure of dominance that we hadn't questioned for, I guess, decades, and now like OpenAI is just coming in using clean competition to take them out. And it's not just OpenAI, it's Perplexity, it's Claude, like it's all these businesses that are coming in. And so we repeatedly think that these businesses cannot be dismantled by traditional market forces, but I think that's a lack of imagination.
Yeah.
And we're confronted by that every day in Silicon Valley.
I think my argument is more that heightened regulation, I believe the evidence just does not show that it chills investment activity across the board, and that smart, effective regulation can actually, if anything, the data shows, help with innovation and investments in private companies. I have a toddler at home, and I remember, it was told early on that you have to set boundaries for them. And having represented a lot of founders, they are like toddlers in more ways than one. And I think we often need to set boundaries for innovation to help it grow and to grow efficiently. And it's about not just protecting consumers, it's about protecting investors. And I just think it's critical to helping that space grow. And I think the data I provide shows that more than any data or anecdotes on the other
I think
side.
the best innovation happens in the frontier of regulation, where it's precisely unclear. And it's in that frontier where you can arbitrage market forces to achieve results for consumers. That's basically what Uber did. We didn't really know whether Uber drivers are full-time employees or not. There was this view that it would kill the company once we made that decision. The company's still alive today in public, and we don't really know the answer to that question.
Sure, but I think that to your point about innovation moving faster than regulation, I think that's a feature, not a bug. And look at crypto, look at AI, it's moved much quicker, and at a certain point, as it matures, regulation and boundaries are important for everyone involved.
Yeah. I don't know. I think boundaries are like a like a therapy thing. That should just stay in therapy.
Well, let's take a pause. We'll maybe
Wait, do I have my argument?
Yeah, please. Oh, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah.
Jeez.
You had
I
such
see
a
how it
thorough
is.
response to mine.
Oh, okay. Well, how much time do we have? Are we still?
We're good.
We're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, Adam, that, look, where do funds make their money, right? The funds make their money, these venture capital funds make money by investing in companies and selling their stock. What are the avenues for selling their stock? IPOs and M&A exits. And believe me, IPOs don't happen every day. Most of our exits are through M&A. M&A is the lifeblood of a fund. Now, I'm not talking about dinky M&A. You have those 1Xers, 2Xers, maybe a 3Xer. Those happen all the time. We know regulation's not going to impede that. Maybe that's a lot of your statistics, quote unquote. It's all these small dinky companies getting acquired, acqui-hires, whatever. I'm talking about the 40Xers and the fund returners that allow us to say that the fund has returned 3X cash on cash, the overall fund. If you're telling me that these exits are now inhibited, come on, how are the investors are now sitting on illiquid stock in Figma? They were promised a 40, 100X exit on their investment, and now they have no liquidity for their LPs. You can't tell me that I don't have to go to data here, it's just first principles. Logically, of course, it's gonna make me not want to invest in certain businesses. Or it's going to chill my desire to do this kinds of investments, but also it's a tough situation to be in. You might tell me, well, we have mechanisms in deals to address these things like reverse termination fees, but that's just heightened transaction costs when you think about it from an economic perspective, and those don't increase. Transaction costs increasing don't increase transaction volumes or values. We all know this. So this doesn't make sense to me.
It's good for lawyers, and that's what we're here for.
I get that. Yeah, it's great for lawyers. You want to be a great transaction. Anyways, the second argument is we actually have real-world analogs. Look at Europe, which we view as the bastion of regulation. No offense, Europeans. Oh, there's one maybe over there. But venture capital and technology is unequivocally, I'm sorry to say this, an American phenomenon, and it's a phenomenon of Silicon Valley. We routinely are the birthplace of innovation time and time again. Governments envy Silicon Valley to try to recreate this. They cannot. not at this scale. And now we have, despite having DeepMind in the UK, we gave birth to OpenAI. And right now in the AI race, the only non-US AI champion is Mistral, which is based in France. Yeah. That's one company out of 20. And so that tells you right there, like, you have a highly regulated place, and it's even businesses that form in Europe that become super successful come to America for a reason. Yeah. And so we have real world comparisons where heightened regulation actually does impact venture capital, does impact capital markets, and does create friction in transactions that impede a lot of other activity.
So I want to thank you, Nadia, and I'd like to respond to a couple of points there. I understand that investors need to make money through M&A and IPOs, and I would point to my earlier evidence that they still are, if not doing so increasingly over the past few years. I think, though, that regulatory scrutiny and concern has sort of become a straw man argument to stand in the place of other things like valuation corrections and interest rates, et cetera. I've heard a lot of VCs complain about this. I've not seen anyone sort of give up venture because of the regulatory threat. And it's similar to, right, like we see this happening in retail. Like we look around us, there's empty department stores. Retail's a really hard business. And if your business is struggling, it's easy to point to a straw man like regulation or crime than it is to looking at the, what's happening in your business, the fundamentals, the, things like I discussed. So I think that's what's happening here. And I think what you've pointed to is just a part of the natural life cycle of a innovative company, right? And I don't think we're arguing kind of regulation pre-1930s, but as a company matures and gets older, it's more heavily regulated. The risk-reward calculus changes. That's what this business is. The more risk you take on, and part of that calculation, Jamie mentioned this yesterday, is thinking about sort of regulatory issues, but you're rewarded for that. And for the best companies, they have good outcomes, right? Whether it's an eventual IPO, an acquisition, like this industry finds a way, and I think this is maybe just a natural way. There's just a lot of market saturation. A lot of AI companies are being funded right now, and even if we ignore regulation, like only a small number of those should continue to be successful and be acquired or IPO. So
the market will decide that. The free market will decide that.
Yeah, and it will, but the free market often needs a little help and guidance and boundaries, like my daughter. All right, let's open it up to our audience. So now we're sort of playing the role of judges. And you are more or less experts in this space, so you can agree, add new points, disagree, and we are on the lookout for sort of best comments. Now, we've heard feedback that you all wanted more time to talk, so now is your time to shine.
And no personal attacks, please.
You can make fun of my bald head. All right, so we have a couple of mic runners, okay? We'll go here. Hara? Right over here, right by the pillar.
Come at me.
Yeah, if you can stand and speak, yep.
And say your name.
Is this on? Okay. Hi, Bahara Stapleberg. I'm not an expert in investment, so I probably shouldn't speak. I'm GC of a graduate school in Santa Barbara. But what I can say, though, is to me, heightened regulation, it may be costly, it may be timely, but it separates the quality companies versus quality over quantity. So the type of investments that will happen are going to be of better quality because these companies who have met that higher regulation, there's a level of confidence in investing in these companies because they've met the heightened regulation. So it's as an outside investor, if I'm considering investing in a company that has jumped through the hoops of regulation, they've met it, I'm going to feel a lot more confident versus an environment where there isn't that heightened regulation. And then even internally, if internally you're thinking about investing. Again, it gives you the confidence, we've crossed our T's, we've dotted our I's. And so that regulation just really, separates the quality over the, the non-quality. So.
So the premise is founders who jump through the regulatory hoops produce higher quality companies than founders who don't. I mean, I would argue that I'd rather invest in the founders who just get stuff done and make money.
But at a certain point, getting stuff done includes navigating.
That to me is like a yacht problem. Like, as a founder, I'm like trying to like get money in the door so I can pay my employees, and then also like build a product and not pay $1,000 an hour to a lawyer to figure out some like.
And I think that's
scripture.
right. And your point about, and I absolutely agree that most venture capitalists, when they're making their investment decisions, are, Lina Khan is not top of mind for them. And your argument was that she is top of mind for sort of later stage investors. And I would argue that would be if our debate was, is heightened regulation chilling investment activity in pre-IPO companies? Maybe I would be a little more open to your arguments, but I see.
Semantics of this expression are curious because you just asked in private companies, and it seems like it's yes or it's yes in some cases. So technically, I'm right.
I would A.
Or syntax, I'm not sure.
Syntax, yeah.
Hi, I'm Ida Walquist Ortiz. I have my own consultancy. It's called Co-Launchpad. My comment is that, well, here's the question. Should we not believe in those mission statements, like to make the world a better place?
No.
Because it seems like regulations often do certain things to make society better in the long run or more safer, as the EU representative that was here yesterday mentioned in his framework for AI in accordance with the EU regulations.
The EU has single-handedly ruined the internet. You have to go to every page and click I accept, and you don't even know what you're accepting. It's like an extra step. You can actually click I reject and it won't have any impact. You can actually still browse the web page.
That's
anyway,
happening
sorry.
here too. That's the comment.
But I mean, like, if the EU has ruined the internet, which, let's be real, like, who's to say that a European Union bureaucrat can also regulate AI intelligently?
All the EU bureaucrats I've met are extremely intelligent, and I don't think it's ruined the internet. It's just made it unique, and I don't think it has. I mean, we still surf the internet, right? And people are still investing in companies that are building on the internet. Very few companies have left Europe because of this. There is just no.
They have no
again,
choice.
Going back to what the debate is about, there are anecdotes, but no data or evidence to show that this is actually chilled investment activity.
They're holding the single market hostage because they know their customers, but at some point when they lose purchasing power, they'll abandon them too. But to answer your point, like, we see these mission statements. I don't want to be purely cynical here. I'm an optimist, mostly.
You play one on TV.
Yeah, I play one on TV. But like, there's a lot of greenwashing in what we do, and a lot of ways to manipulate people into buying our product. Even these like sort of carton waters are ways to manipulate us into spending more money on what is water. And so it's unclear that the regulation that produced this is something better for us or something that we're just playing for hyperinflated basic human necessities. So I look at those mission statements and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I should believe them. And oftentimes, like, I don't think villains I think those are the most challenging villains to spot. It's the ones who like wrap themselves up in these kinds of statements.
Yeah.
This is very interesting conversation, so thank you. Question I had is, as a founder, and especially a founder of an AI company that combines legal and AI, what do you think is the right alternative for regulation to make sure that we are accountable, we are transparent, and we're safe for consumer?
You would say the market.
I would say it's the market. So like, my personal belief is I think these products are bad for people. And I don't mean just AI, I mean all the stuff that rots your brain, like social media, is so bad for people. But the fact of the matter is that it's what makes money. And it's what the venture capitalists actively seek out. Like, there are venture capitalists, you can quote them. Like, I think this person at Lightspeed who invested in Snapchat, he was like, look, my wife said this would rot our daughter's brain, so I invested in it. So yeah, to an extent, I think consumers aren't protected. the argument against regulation is not so much that we shouldn't have regulation. It's more, I don't know if I trust the regulators to make the right decisions for these companies, because oftentimes the decisions seem misguided and don't accomplish their goals. And so I'm in favor of like more intelligent regulation. And so like when I look at, again, at like Figma, Adobe, I'm kind of like, well, what was the real reasoning here? I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me. You want to say something, Adam? I hear you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone would argue that we don't need more, we shouldn't have more intelligent regulation. But I think one of the issues here is that, venture capitalists, their job is not to protect the public or other investors. It's not to increase investment activity in private companies. It's to return capital to their LPs. And so the sort of externalities, more capital to their LPs, and those sort of externalities fall elsewhere. And I think what's important here is actually, I think more so, I think smart regulation is sort of another straw man. It's predictable regulation and understanding that there are boundaries and there's accountability. And I think that's important, even if it's not always, there's ubiquity to that, and that's important.
Yeah, but it's not a good look when Mark Zuckerberg goes in front of like a congressional committee and they ask him, how does Facebook make money? Like, I think that's a pitiful excuse for governance and regulation.
I mean, it's
When the
sort of a hard
regulators-
question. How does Facebook make money?
Ads. Yeah, okay, there you go. You just got me. I see what you did there. But like, that's the point. That's the point. Like, you had these senators who are paid so much money, and they force a CEO to come out and grandstand, and they don't know how a business is run. I think that's inexcusable. And I think there are real-world examples of regulators who are really smart. I think Singapore does it really well, but they also have highly paid and talented public servants who understand the industries very well.
Sorry, can I just ask one follow-up question? So,
Wait, can you wait for the mic? Yeah.
that's a very interesting point that you just mentioned, but I want to go back to maybe a few sentences ago, which
Go for
was, talking about regulators in Europe. And how do you see the difference? Because, the regulators in the US, and I'm not disparaging anybody or undermining their abilities, but, people that work for the government are not really paid a, interesting salary, to just say.
Totally.
So when you put that population in charge of passing regulation, and then you, on the other side, have, the innovators and people who actually do know what's happening in this industry, who are educating these regulators, and these guys obviously lobbying, they have their own incentives. How do you see a balance there to kind of avoid this whole
The problem? Well, I think we should make the government an attractive place for talented people to go and work.
I love that. I agree. And on the spirit of moving forward, I'm looking for a comment, a contribution, a sort of a thought, idea, someone to weigh in on this debate. We can answer questions, but we're getting to the end. I think
But
there was
Adam said I
a
was right.
question here. I agree with you. Yeah.
General counsel for Mixed Restaurants.
Hi, Sarah.
So definitely not a capital markets expert. But I wonder if there's usefulness in looking kind of one step back to just investment, chilling of investment activity, to think about whether these heightened regulations chill new businesses from forming. That like we're talking about AI and how there's a surge in investment in AI. Sure, but now we're about to regulate that industry, or we're talking about regulating that industry. So maybe we'll all move on to the next thing, but are we chilling competition and new investment in AI or in older industries like retail? You brought up restaurant space is where I am, where we've kind of regulated those and made them really expensive to start up. Nadia raised the point of like, if I'm starting a new business, I don't have $1,000 an hour to spend on outside counsel to tell me the entire regulatory framework for a new industry. So I wonder how that plays into this discussion.
So I love your comment, and I think that restaurant comparison is really good. I think in the sort of venture-backed, emerging growth company space, like Nadia said earlier, she knows of very few early-stage VCs who think about Lina Khan when they're making their investment decisions. I know of even fewer founders in that space who do that. Maybe that's part of the problem. It's a really interesting
Yeah,
question.
but you didn't say Lina Khan-based regulation. You just said heightened regulation.
Fair enough.
And by the way, in our own city here where we're sitting, it's prohibitively expensive to start up a restaurant. They find themselves wrapped up in regulatory red tape, often used as weapons by competitors to put them out of business. So again, like, I'm not coming here like a free market capitalist, being like the free markets decide everything. I'm also just like, I want regulation to be a tool for good, and I just don't see it happening here.
Okay, we're going to end with, we're going to poll the audience one more time and ask Anjali to do a quick count. Okay, so again, we want you to raise your hand if you agree with this statement that heightened regulation is chilling investment activity in private companies.
Wait, even fewer?
10.
Okay, now if you have the counter position, heightened regulation is not chilling investment in private companies.
Damn. Yeah.
27.
We'll let the data lie as it is, and we will just
Lie as it is.
This is a biased crowd.
An interesting Freudian slip there, Adam. I'll let that sit.
So the facts don't lie, as we know. With that, I want to thank all of you. I think we will.
Do we want to give our official views or?
Oh yeah. So we began this by before we started discussing or preparing for this. We said, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you agree with this sort of statement? 10 being absolutely heightened regulation is chilling investment activity in private companies. 0, it's not. And we both came up with the same number.
Like 2 or 3. Right?
2 or 3. So we actually, I think, are aligned with the audience and where they lie. And it seems like if we sort of put everyone on polls, we're all actually in agreement. But a fun way to think about these issues is sort of take polarizing views. And Nadia, we can go back to being best friends. So I want to thank you.
We're not even friends. We're like acquaintances. I only met you yesterday.
We can start. I'm hopeful we can start. We can start being best friends. That's not true. We'll circle up and find, we'll end, and then we'll discuss who from our audience we want to give this to. But thank you to all of you that voted, that listened, that weighed in. It was fun.